Pixar's Win or Lose is a series that came out on Disney Plus in 4 separate installments across 4 weeks. And so I decided to keep up with the series by bringing out a review of each 2 episodes every week, and this is a compilation of all of those 4 reviews clumped into one place. If you want to hear a guy talk about a single show for practically as long as half of the show even is, you're in the right place. Here is our first impressions of each and every episode. It ties itself into a knot at the end. It's over an hour of talking with some highs and lows, some controversial takes here and there. On everything, our thoughts on Pixar's Win or Lose. Enjoy.
Winning is just a matter of how you look at it.
So, the latest Pixar project came out today, and I'll be honest, I was kind of hyped for it in the lead up to this movie. It's not even a movie, it's a TV series. Pixar is currently been going through a little bit of an era right now where they're releasing TV series directly to Disney Plus, and though they've fumbled in the past with the likes of Monsters at Work, their most recent release was a real big triumph. That was Pixar's Dream Productions, a spin-off expansion based off of the Inside Out universe that I think is really, really solid. Not just because it does all the more emotion-related puns, and also, of course, gives us a kind of hint preview knockoff version of Riley as an older teenager. I just think in general, that show was pretty neat. And so hearing that there is another one being made by Pixar, kind of going through development hell for a few months as well, since we've heard about the marketing for ages, I came into this with pretty high hopes, to the point I even forgot one of the major controversies attached to this series. Today, I finally got to see some of this series, and it is not Dream Productions quality.
This is good, because it's high stakes, and that's the kind we like.
This is Win or Lose, a sports-based TV series that actually does some interesting things beyond just being a baseball movie, but in long form. And in a lot of ways, I really like the concept of where some of this series goes. Because surprise, surprise, this is actually an anthology series. Every single episode has a different main protagonist central to the plot of that piece, and it all takes place over the same week. This series has that classic overlapping story format, which honestly is my absolute favorite thing. I love Hoodwinked for it, I love Odd Taxi for it, I love Attack on Titan for it. And to see it being done with their Pixar 3D animation style, mwah! I want to consume all of this and then re-edit it in chronological order. I eat this stuff up. However, almost every other aspect of this series of what I've seen so far is unimpressive, and I'm uninterested.
It's so mean!
But we'll start things off as the series starts off. Let's just talk only about the first episode for a bit. This one is entirely centric on the sweaty girl. The premise is this is all part of a baseball team. Each character has their own things going on in life, and it'll all come together for the whole championship match at the end of the week. And she is meant to be the archetypal, anxious, shy character in the middle of everything going on. We get a nice preview of the ending of the week at the very start with a whole bunch of out-of-context clues for some of the other characters involved in this whole anthology series. And then we get to see the actual trials of this kid, who has some nice ideas. You can see what they're going for, but I can't help but feel that this is entirely a crossfade compilation of all the things you've seen before and Pixar themselves have already done before. There are many, many, many baseball movies. You know the plotline of a baseball movie. There's a character that keeps swinging for the ball and doesn't get it, and that's very stressful. You've also heard the type where the coach is the father. The coach is the father in this. There's an element of, their father is disappointed in them and sort of butts them out of the way in places. There's a cooler character that's more successful at a baseball game. There's certainly a lot to say about that star athlete in this series that we'll get to later on. And though there are occasional unique things about it, like the coach giving sign language and then going on for a nice little heart-to-heart with his daughter and then doing a pretty classic standard sign language joke, the real kicker for this episode and this character is the fact that their anxiety manifests in the form of a growing blob of sweat. A big, sweaty character that is the embodiment of anxiety. As if you took the concept of anxiety and turned it into a character to put into a Pixar TV series. Do you see where I'm going with this first episode and why I'm not impressed? Not only is this a concept we literally have already done with Pixar in the last year alone, it's also just far inferior. It is so diluted down and basic that this is the most generic take of a baseball anxiety blob character Pixar concept, TV series, story.
I'll just see myself in. Thanks, excuse me. Can you move?
The most creative thing I can find in this episode, really, is the fact that there's a lot of film grain in this show, and I don't know why that is. It's just a stylistic choice. And you'd think maybe with a growing Sweat character, they're kind of going to be a semi-protagonist of their own. They're going to have some of the biggest quotable lines in the whole show. No. I'm not even sure if this character is played for laughs. Every line they say doesn't really have a hint of comedy in it. They have a couple lines that are faintly, this is... but it's just really, really simplistically done. Now, there's a whole theme to this series that is pretty clear to be expressed out of the show, and it's the idea that everyone's going through their own things, and you don't know what they're going through. Everyone has their own problems, their own perspectives. It's nice that later on we'll see the same events repeated, but with a different lens of how each character acted. Surprise, surprise, you're not going to see the sweaty blob in anyone else's point of view. But at the same time, for this to be the very first episode, there's not much to hop on here other than, kids will get the idea of shyness and anxiety and pressure, but there are way far many options that would be a far superior version of showing this idea. Of course, the animation's great. There's a couple really good cinematography shots. I like the mid to long length shots they've got in there in places. And I like the fact that obviously we're going to interact with all sorts of other characters that are the protagonists of their own episodes later on. As I said, I eat all this stuff up, but while I love the concept and the formatting of the storyline, I'm looking at this and I just see a knockoff of Chicken Little. That's the biggest... That's not a good comparison, you know? Or when we do move on to other problems going on, like the fact that they failed in a baseball game, what do you know? Someone filmed it and now it's become an internet meme. That most basic, cliched, outdated idea that I've seen so many times, I feel even the kids of today that this show is aiming for is not going to find it relatable because that's such an older version of the internet. That's kind of a millennial take on how internet meme culture manifests. I don't know if it's such a Gen Z thing these days. Anyway, as the plot goes, this character's not very good at baseball. They decide to go into hardcore training with their anxiety Sweat character pushing them to train all the more. It is literally just those beats from Inside Out 2 with a far inferior version that's not Maya Hawke. She trains, there's a couple scenes on the in-betweens, she trains some more, she does faintly better, and then it's game night. I do appreciate that the actual finale is seen in this first episode, and all of the episodes. I kind of thought it was going to be that we would see all the first 6 days of the week repeated by everyone's perspective, and then the final episode is the final day with everyone combined. No, we just go basically straight to the end game, which is like, nice. Again, I like the format more than I like the story. And then we get to the emotional swell of the episode, which is, you know, an attempt, but when it's also a TV series that covers this in about 25 minutes, you lose the impact of that emotion because it's not well established enough, it's not given enough time to breathe. But her coach father then gives her a pep talk that allows the sweat to disappear, and she's able to do the action she wants to do. For a first episode, it's just your most basic cliche idea that you've seen done before by Pixar, and is a really bad first impression to the series, because it's not even like the best version of its tale. I think really the biggest disappointment for this first episode is the Sweat character themselves doesn't get any room to grow beyond physically. I want to see more fun interactions to play around with. Maybe I just want more comedy in my serious story. I don't know. Because if it's meant to be a message for kids of, you can clear your anxiety if you have a good father, then maybe in that regard, you could tell that message better. And this, it feels like a overly kiddie version that simplifies things down too far in a way that doesn't really respect the intelligence of its audience the way that Inside Out 2 does, which is covering the very same topics and will be a theme for this whole series as a whole, that their demographic aiming is a little bit skew-if, but we'll get there as we get there. Anyway, if there's anything close to a good plotline here, it's the punchline, it's not a punchline, it's the plot twist. She wallops the ball with her face, not with the bat. Wahoo. Would have been helpful if they didn't spoil that in the literal first shot of the show entirely, and you could see it's the same person. You know, otherwise that kind of ruins your one highlight of the episode, because you know the ending from the start. Maybe you're meant to not notice it, but I think it's kind of, you know, visible. But going into episode 2, I think the series really starts to show its teeth and show a little bit more what it's all about. Not that that is necessarily a good thing. Because you see, the second episode is all about the teacher character here. They are the umpire of the game. And notably, they are not a child. They are an adult in this world, again having their own problems, faintly smarter in the fact of, oh yeah, kids can now see a little bit of the behind the scenes as being an adult and understand that they've got things as well. Maybe their teachers don't live in schools. That's cool. But also, then at that point, what is the message you're trying to tell here? Because the storyline of this guy is he's lonely and he's having romantic issues and he's dealing with the fact that he's come to an end of a long-term relationship with a woman who wanted to get married with him and he couldn't handle that responsibility. You know, it's a slightly bigger theme than just general romance and relationships that's more aimed towards adults than it is the young kid audience that you're aiming for. If you're going to dilute an anxiety premise down to its really weakest points, why use the next episode so focused on this sort of more existential loneliness and learning how to get into online dating as a 30, 40-year-old, meeting strangers online in a way that I feel like their audience also isn't doing as much because this is aimed for kids who probably meet people at school. This whole episode is a Tinder representation. Also, I think, kind of a little bit millennial, a little bit outdated. Maybe, what do I know? I don't online date anymore. But it felt very old school in its formatting already for being 2025. Now, what is nice is some of the actual visual highlights of this show. Whilst the sweaty blob character gave no real verbal additions to the episode, the visuals were at least nice, but the visuals here, also quite nice, also kind of basic. This guy is a guarded guy. He's very defensive, he's very doubling down on his points, he doesn't compromise at all, which is a nice piece of theming there, sure. And also he has this visuals of a kind of 8-bit inspired video game aesthetic. Conceptualizing that as this is what online dating is like, you level up as you gain more hearts and connect with someone on a deeper level is, yeah, I guess a way you can kind of gamify the concept. But again, it feels kind of bland and also basic and also not accurate to moderner times. The guy's being introduced to Tinder for the first time, and Tinder started in 2012. Not sure how relevant it is to the kid audience you're building. But anyway, it is interesting to see all the different interactions he has with different characters. He knows one of the kids, he interacts with one of the kids' mothers. Obviously, he knows the coach dad, who's another teacher. And he's got a constant thing of always being attacked by somebody as the umpire, with parents always shooting shots at him. Even his car gets egged, which is a nice visual little punchline I quite liked. It was a silent one, it was a subtle one. Anyway, while I think this guy's quite a generic basic, oh look, he's a lonely nerd character. He likes nerdy things, and books, and video games. My actual real favorite character in this series pops up in this episode. It's the janitor, who has this absurd, slippery vibe to him. He can teleport into any scene he wants. He's the archetype of that idea of a janitor knows everything. They just know everything going on at the school. I adore him. I think he is the highlight of the whole series that I've seen so far. And great fun times. He helps out the guy, giving him dating advice, giving him the dating online app, and is rooting for him as a wingman.
That's what? Hey, give me my phone. Frankie Pooh, it's not that difficult.
He's my favorite guy. He's able to lean into the actual comedic elements of this show that's not just cringe or unsuccessful, and he comes with this nice, absurd visual aesthetic that generally, visually, this show does very, very well. I think that's the biggest highlight. Good to witness with your eyes. Don't listen to it. Yeah, it's more the directing that's got more creative flourishes, and sometimes that bleeds out into lines, like this guy being called out with the line going, "Frank, you're single. Your single dose latte, here it is." I'm like, that's nice. It's also here we see that weird cashier lady from the trailers, the one with no nose. Her whole thing is she's really friendly as a coffee worker. He asks her out, doesn't work out. All the cringe awkwardness in the world. It's also an opportunity to repeat the jokes you've already made even sooner recently in the Pixar itinerary, as they make more "I can make screenplays now that I'm a coffee cashier worker" jokes that we literally saw 2 months ago. 2. And hey, why not? Let's chuck in that gag from Elemental as well, of burning their mouth on a hot thing. It's like, this seems like a series that has been drip-fed all of the remains or the highlights of some of the past Pixar projects to put something together that's good, it's in a nice format, but you've seen it all before, even by the same people. It's like, ugh, the substance is missing. I only like the timeline. And if you're trying to rely on the jokes and the humor, they tell a cashier can't say the name of the name correctly at the coffee shop joke.
So sorry. Have a great day, scene. Sean, I'm sorry.
Wow. I think the only other real highlight of this episode in particular is at least the visual of actually getting a connection with someone online where their chat log is slowly getting bigger as they have more heartful conversations and talk more. I think that's a really nice visual for that romantic progression. What's the theming of that character? I don't know. They tell a pun of someone ghosting them earlier, and this character that we never really get to see properly just gets chucked away at the end of the episode, as if to say, hey, online dating. Ain't that funny? Stick to traditional in person because I'm old and I don't understand this format. And the guy chooses to go for someone in real life instead. Not to say that, like, you know, you have to double down if you've established an online dating episode, but, like, it does feel a little bit like, tradition. Let's stick to the tradition. It's gotta be someone in real life. I don't know. Because, yeah, at the end, he cuts off this woman, goes to his ex, who he's been umming and ahhing about this whole time. There's this great moment of him going towards her, with the janitor again helping out with that, icing sport, which is just really, really fun. There's a couple other flares that are in there for some reason, flying over cheerleaders. Yeah, okay. The visuals are nice, as I said before. And I do like the idea of him slowly taking off all of his guarded ailments to be open to new experiences, just for a final line to be, yeah, be emotionally vulnerable. I like the subtler background stuff, apparently. And then we get another plot twist climax ending of an episode that you can predict again from the beginning of the first episode, because they showed very much in your face that this guy is sad in the final day and is just having a horrible time. What do you know? The ex moved on. Whoa. And out of the 8 episodes that Win or Lose has to show, that quarter is all we have so far.
How about you?
Now, I don't know how often Disney Plus has been doing the slower rollout of episodes. We're going to get 2 episodes every week from now on, and I'll probably make an extending video on each of those 2. But I do want to talk about some of these future episodes, because I think a lot of them are still relevant in this early opinion building of this show. And that is just the fact that this is a horrible first impression. You've given us an incredibly basic, diluted down, generic storyline that doesn't really have good humor or creative storytelling to it. And then you got a second one that similarly has a sort of outdated take on dating with a weird theming to aim towards children if that's what you're doing, considering the first one was so diluted down. And according to some of the choices they make later, yeah, this demographic's getting a little bit confused because, and I'll talk about this drama a lot more in detail when we actually get to it, one of the bigger controversies around this show that I completely forgot about in the latest trailer, I apologize, I'm good at blocking out bad news, I guess. It's a good skill these days, is the fact that one of these future characters that we've seen has been absolutely gutted on the cutting room floor compared to what they were first meant to be, while showing us a completely diluted down, simplistic, pretty uncreative show so far, beyond the directing and the visuals. We were going to learn that one of the problems of one of the future children is the fact that they are transgender, and they're handling at least their gender identity as part of one of the things they're dealing with on the side. And when you're thinking about the theme of, hey, what message are we telling to our audience, this is a really good, integral, important one to discuss. It's a form of representation that would make this series stand out against the crowd, and it is a real one that genuine children and teenagers have experienced and would be worth exploring. However, as you probably can assume, this has been gutted out by Disney. And pretty late in the storyline as well, as it had all pretty much been put in place, and even the casting choice for the character of Kai is transgender themselves, and have come out and said, this is horrendous, we've been working on this for 4 years, the whole element of the character is gone, and I feel underrepresented now. Very valid, of course. To back out last minute only comes off as nothing less than cowardly. And without getting too preachy, in these kind of times, it's more important than ever, and only acts to define the current legacy of your company. Essentially, Disney came out with a statement and said, if we're telling these messages to children, we're aware of the fact that parents might not want us to explain these kind of themes to children and would rather cover it themselves. And while there's all sorts of room for disagreement, it does sound like, if anything, this is the parents' fault, but also the company for actually, you know, doubling down on the parents' take. But hey, considering we're at a point where teachers are actually being berated by obnoxious parents, I guess I'm not surprised in that sense. But considering the end result we've seen so far is just an incredibly diluted down first episode, which is just abysmally unintelligent to explore for a kid, and then the other one is an adult relationship that kids can't really relate to and understand. And we also hear that future things are going to talk about divorce and parenting problems like that, which is a big sort of heavier topic for kids to conceptualize around. To say that transgender issues is one that's too above for kids to hear from us just feels like an insult to that demographic, to say, let's give them the more basic generic schlop that someone's already done, diluted down and better in another form. What? Just chuck them Chicken Little again. Whilst at the same time, considering this is being introduced so very late, very much shows that this is not necessarily a writer's issue or a producer's issue. This is a higher up getting scared that it's going to affect the bottom line in a way that actively starts to stab some of its own audience members in the back. Because the fact remains, whether you want to talk about it or not, trans kids exist. And to actively stop the representation of these people is to actively backstab some demographic of your audience who presumably do watch your stuff. At the very least, because they've announced it and we know which character it is and we know their name and they get a dedicated episode, it does mean that they can't stop us from headcanoning the fact that it's still real anyway. Art is art and you can perceive it however you want, so hey, the seeds are already planted. You might end up with a inferior storyline that's going to be diluted down and not do the character justice, but we know who they really are. And at the same time, we're learning all the more about the company itself. Not that it should be a surprise. While this show is meant to be a real theme of, everyone's going through something, you don't know what they're going through, here's a bunch of examples they could be going through and how they can explore it, hey, something here might help you. The fact of the matter is, this series isn't doing a great job in its first 2 episodes as an introduction, and it's not going to do a good job overall because it's not fully representing a lot of the people it wanted to present, and is just giving you slapped together versions of, look at this. It's just bad overall. None of this is to say that the writers themselves are bad, or the animators, or the actual creators, but on a big scale of things, and as the final product, this series is just far, far miles down below the highlights of Dream Productions. And maybe it's because Dream Productions has a abstract idea that has all sorts of puns to play off of, and this is a personal story. Going back to that whole Disney is cutting out directors and their personal stories thing. But the real injustice is the fact that these personal stories aren't being given justice themselves enough. Pixar has shown that they can do an anxiety story, and this version isn't it. Pixar has shown that they could do romance a million times over, but this felt a little bit outdated and naff. And as we get into the later things, I'm gonna love the fact that the timeline loops back over itself and you can see all these details, and I want to rearrange the show. But in actually expecting intellectual messaging and theming that can be sent to children and I assume teenagers, what is the demographic here? There's themings here that seem to be more for adults and parents. So is it young kids that can't handle these bigger topics, or is it skewed towards teenagers because it's relevant? Honestly, I don't know what it's going for, and maybe it's because of these last-minute meddlings by the big managers up top that make this show so unimpactful. It's a nice visual flourish, a weird little artistic style coming from Pixar. Why does that lady not have a nose? I don't know. But after hyping it up as the likes of, this could be the next big Dream Productions, turns out it's just, it's more on the lose side than it is on the win. I, at the very least, will keep watching the 2 episodes each week and probably make a little pop-up video review about it, if you're at least interested in hearing more. But even politics that shouldn't really count as politics aside, this show's just pretty naff overall. And knowing that there is such a cutting room floor only makes me more interested to learn about the cancelled version of this series that could have had all the more potential. So we'll just have to see if something like that exists sometime in the future. It's another Wednesday today, so it's time for more Pixar's Win or Lose. The side project animated series going straight to Disney Plus and for some reason coming out 2 episodes at a time. Now, we've initially covered the first 2 episodes and the general overview of the series last week, where we covered a lot more of the overall premise of the series. And though I still do stand by a good lot of the criticisms I had about the general show, let's at least look at episode 3 and 4 today with a little bit more of a closer lens to see if perhaps Pixar's Win or Lose can revive itself. As I understand it anyway, general responses to this series are quite mixed. As while it does have a genuine nice presentation, the directing is absolutely fantastic, as well as some of the messaging it's trying to achieve, I focused a lot last week on some of the more more notable controversies that technically aren't even relevant yet to the story. That's an episode 7 problem. And funnily enough, in trying to research some reviews regarding episode 3 and 4, there is nothing yet. I'm the first, or journalists don't want to do episode by episode, fair enough. So let's just go into it ourselves and talk a little bit more about all things Pixar. Now, whilst 1 and 2 gave me personally a pretty bad first impression of the series, covering very generic, easy to see cliches and millennial humor that's already outdated, episode 3 and 4 at the very least has a nice narrative thing that makes it a little bit bumped up from anxious student and dating middle-aged man. And that is in the fact that episode 3 covers Rochelle, the sort of super successful girl boss hard worker character, and then episode 4 is directly related with their mother, being instead a lot more fluid, a little less serious, and also an influencer. Alright. But I think the fact that these 2 episodes are so intrinsically linked together and back-to-back really helps sell the overall narrative that this series is trying to achieve, as there is some really great emotional sequences in this double bill. And in fact, that's pretty much entirely the point, as this baseball series has minimal amount of baseball in these 2 episodes specifically. Only the first episode really cared about it seems. No, see, the plot line this time is that Rochelle is dealing with the fact that her family can't necessarily afford the financial burden of actually staying on the baseball team. And the thing to really kick things off is the fact that baseball has now become a little bit more expensive for the next tier of success. What's more, the mother is far more aloof and less mature, putting all of the burden on the daughter character instead. And so in order to make ends meet, she literally girl bosses into a businesswoman suit, increasing her height in her imagination and just getting on the grind of it. And I really like this. It's a lot more than just a simple montage into our success and end of the road happiness, even though of course there is that element as well, but it also goes into a more general theme of the corruption of a straight-A student doing bad things in order to make ends meet and get a paycheck, with the main slippery slope being that she's allowing other students to cheat via her advice. And for being such a short episode, it does a really good job of showing that general progression down into those depths. All the while the mother character is seen as this real unlikable character as she just keeps stuffing into her phone the whole time and filming everything. It does kind of lean on that classic influencer, haha, aren't they funny and silly, which is tired and one joke only, but I do like at the very least that it's made with a certain narrative lens in mind, and so the daughter is going to be a little bit more judgmental on these actions from her mother, especially as she goes on to quit her job and become even less of a financial source of income to support her hobbies and the things she actually wants to achieve. But of course, what really flourishes against this series that I praised a whole chunk last week enough, but I gotta say more and more, is just the imagination factor they add onto this series, giving everyone's own unreliable narrator element going into the fantastical. Whilst before we saw the sort of 8-bit representation of dating and a giant sweaty blob growing on someone's shoulder, this time it's just a general anti-gravity effect. And also the giant businesswoman suit. The idea that everything's getting a little bit out of hand and lost as everything becomes unbridled. It's a pretty simple idea, just playing around with gravity, I guess, as the gravity of the situation leans down on her heavier, I guess. But it opens up to some just fantastic sequences and shots that you can see shuffled behind the background of all this footage. And even though they do it only just a little bit, I love the ones where they just outright change the direction of gravity, as she is actively going more and more sideways while talking to someone, and then upon finding a resolution with that someone, immediately slapping back down to reality. This is clearly where the series shines and what the series really wants to show off. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe if you're interested in more Pixar Win or Lose. We're going to cover these every Wednesday for the next couple of weeks until they're done. I love talking about all things animation. You can probably tell because of my damn crazy upload schedule. Anyway, that's the plug. Let's get back to the second half of the video. Sure, some of the plot lines are pretty simplistic. It's the woes of middle-class children. They each have their own thing, maybe going into different classic cliche directions, as much as this one's at least a little bit more mature. Financial burden and the missteps of an authority figure. But this is the kind of stuff in the series that does really make me want to recommend it. As much as I might have some grievances of what happens later and the sort of a milquetoast opening, this episode by itself really had me a lot more on board with just the vibes of what it's doing. This is a well-produced show, the animators are so talented, and the directing is off the charts cool. I mean, look at everything. Look at this damn show. And that's not even getting to the 4th episode. Because you see, in the final moments of episode 3, Rochelle really starts to fall off the deep end, being given a deal with some notable delinquents to essentially properly steal from the hot dog stand that she works at. And though she ultimately says no and comes out of her own corruption pipeline and goes on the run, everything pretty much falls apart for her. She loses her glasses, she has nowhere to go, she hasn't got her phone, so she uses a random payphone in the middle of the street. Again, why I kind of say this movie feels a little outdated. Maybe they do exist still, but I certainly haven't seen them in a long time. Kind of a 2004 story beat if you ask me. And then she's left in the dark waiting for her mother to answer. Cut to next episode. It's time to see the mother's perspective. Oh, also before we go any further, there are also splashes of that video gamey online perspective, which I also really like, because it's not just in the context of online dating, it's anything online. Sending out a forum post to say, hey, I'll help you cheat if you come to me. Very nice to see. Now, with the mother's perspective, we start to see a little bit of the gaps in the story that we otherwise didn't hear from Rochelle. While she did ultimately quit her job because she hated her boss, we actually come to see she really quit because the boss wouldn't let her go see her son at daycare during an emergency. And though she does very much still try and go full-time influencer in a way that's, you know, classic, oh, what a silly person, we do at least see a different representation that it's hearts coming out of the phone and surrounding her, giving her comfort in a world that otherwise isn't really going her way, which is really nuanced and nice to see. And though it's of a different caliber and quest entirely, you can see that the mother as well has that grind mindset as she montages through the days with her goals in mind, namely gunning for more jobs now that she's unemployed. And yeah, of course, it overlaps with all sorts of characters and beats we've seen earlier in the show, which of course, I love that overlapping stuff. And then after seeing so much of a focused perspective of Rochelle through the week, we now get to see how much of a focus her mum was actually somewhat paying attention to her daughter and wasn't entirely aloof the entire time, such that she can be there during her moment of need. Pretty much half of her episode is spent chasing after her daughter, working out what she's been up to, discovering her whole online business empire, again represented in that video gamified way, but as a maze, which is nice to see, as well as visiting locations we didn't even realize she also made it to during the time her daughter was there. Somewhat. It's kind of your classic parent story of worrying about your child falling into certain routines and people and antics as they reach certain ages, at least in her head, that's how she's seeing it. But whilst the first episode was just a baseball story with generic anxiety idea, and also anxiety already exists, and the second one was dating for a teacher randomly, I think these two episodes in the middle so far are the real highlight of the series for actually bringing us that emotional depth and also playing a lot more with the gaps of knowledge. Clearly episode 1 and 2 was just the slow warm-up, so maybe I was a little bit too harsh on it. I don't know how to feel necessarily when we do get around to episode 7 though. You know, because those criticisms are still going to be notable criticisms. But at the very least, I'm reaching a little bit of a turnaround when it comes to win or lose. Even if I might not like some of the content of certain episodes, the choices they make for certain characters, or even some of the representation of the fields and things they want to show off, I still think visually this is just so much beautiful eye candy. And I do look forward to watching these week by week to see the full picture come together. While I certainly still wouldn't call this show absolutely perfect by any means, these two new installments make me think that there is some real solid narrative to see in an otherwise immaculate visual fest of flourish. And so far, episode 3 has definitely been the highlight I've seen so far, and kind of makes me think this is the best it's gonna get. I think it's gonna be kind of tough to beat this episode in my mind, unless the final episode really does a good job wrapping everything together. I still have the motivation to take this whole show, splice it into pieces and play it chronologically because I'm just curious that way. But overall, I'd say it's not directly damaging just yet. And I would say it's more than fine to recommend it going forwards. It just had a little bit of a naff start if you ask me. I don't know, I guess that's my long-winded way of saying I'm finally coming around to feeling mixed about the series. I guess we'll just have to see how that opinion formulates more as we see more of the details next week on Wednesday. It's Wednesday again, which means it's time for more Pixar's Win or Lose. And considering this is a series that has just 8 episodes and we're getting 2 episodes at a time, this week is part 3 of 4. Are you excited about the 3rd installment of Pixar's Win or Lose? I certainly am not excited about part 3 of 4. This is usually the part in a series where there's a little bit of a lull, you know? Usually you have the big push for the opener to, you know, get attention going, and then you have the big finale at the end that wraps it all together. The middle episodes, you can kind of skip over them half the time, you know? And last week we had some genuine good direction that really stepped above what I would say is a relatively bad first impression. And these 2 episodes, yeah, it's just kind of the lull in the middle. To have the first 2 episodes being bad at least means there's something interesting to say, as we love talking about both the amazing and the terrible, even if we sometimes stretch those definitions to, fit the 2 categories. These 2 episodes very much just focus on 2 siblings. You're getting 2 sides of the same-ish story in their own little bubble. First, you have the little brother always looking up to their big sister who's part of the game and having more of a immature outlook on life because they're younger. They get mixed in with the bad kids in hoping to find a friend, and they have a very creative imagination, always looking through things through a toilet roll tube that then opens up to this world of sort of 2D comic pastiche notebook effects, which is, nice. It's not quite gravity-defying or inventing an anxiety character. It's not going into a video gamey world or representing the influencer aesthetic in the real world. It's 2D, it's nice, it's fine. And then on the other side of the story, we see an episode actually with the big sister. Well, actually, it's the love interest attached to the big sister the whole way through. This guy being the kind of bad boy who's just trying to fit in, using humor as his thing. Going through the relationship highs and lows with the bigger sister, and ultimately representing in their extra layer a little bit of papercraft. Still kind of 2D, but now a theater-esque sort of representation of what they're thinking on the inside. Again, that's an okay concept to play around with. The 2 are kind of similar, and honestly, there's sort of a lot of complaints I have for these episodes in just not being that outstanding. As part of a whole collective as a 3-hour binge watch, I think this show is pretty alright, but the fact that the actual release schedule for this has been 2 episodes at a time is both jarring, because these stories are clearly so interconnected that you're meant to catch all the details, and you can't when there's a week break between them all, but also, especially with this particular double slice, it feels a little bit too small scale and similar. To me, the absolute highlight in this original series is the Pixar flair, the extra directorial representation of realizing these kids' worries and showcasing them in their own different formats. Everyone has a different perspective, and they each come with their own special visual effects. The 2D notebook pastiche is nice, but to me, it's not as impressive as what you could do with 2D animation that we have seen in other forms. I don't know if it's the low frame rate I don't like, or that it's not that... I don't know. To me, I'm not that crazy about this particular style of 2D animation that didn't make me go, oh, whoa, whoa. Add that on to the fact that the next episode is still pretty similarly that, but with more of a cardboard aesthetic, and I think it just felt like the most impressive part of this series felt a little bit clipped down. Especially because, actually, from seeing the trailers of Pixar's Win or Lose, I actually thought that they were going to be a full-on theater person. I thought it was going to be that they're always on stage with a spotlight because they're the comedian. They're trying to showcase their comedy. In actuality, it is a cardboard heart, and it's their true inner insecure feelings coming out and dealing with building up this house and, the concerns they have and what they're really thinking on the inside, which is fine. And like, it's nice to see an internal visual effect rather than an external effect that everyone else has, but I just think I would have preferred if it was a stage play, like if there was something more thematic to that. They do some really good things. In the second episode in particular, the whole thing is a metaphor for a relationship. There's a really nice sequence of the guy physically bringing out his inner heart character to showcase the idea of opening their heart to someone else. That's really nice. And representing a relationship as your heart physically expanding as someone moves in, a really nice idea. But it's only nice, not great or grand or brilliant, especially because the actual relationship going on here, though I guess it gets 2 episodes worth of screen time technically, since you see the little brother's perspective on it being bleh to him, really kind of doesn't do well in the fast-paced runtime that this series has. You can tell from seeing the little brother's perspective that they're going to get together and that they later on will have some sort of rough patch. When we come around to seeing the actual relationship later, we know it's going to go badly, and then when they showcase the moment where it goes bad, it doesn't feel like it has the emotional weight it should have in representing a relationship falling apart. The likes we get is the boy visualizing feeling jealous of another character that the girlfriend is attached to, briefly saying a joke that's faintly mentioned as being distasteful, and then I thought maybe he keeps going and says something else that causes the real rough patch, but no, that sly tiny comment pushes the entire narrative of them absolutely hating each other. The way they do it is they cut to the little inside people having an argument silently shouting at each other, but it's not matched with the external characters also shouting at each other consistently, so it feels like you actually skip the argument that makes them so detest each other later on in the timeline, and it's done in a way that just feels a little bit unimpactful. I want to go out and say, oh, these 2 episodes are absolutely terrible, it's worse than the first impression we had at the beginning. But really, it's a worse case scenario than that. These are just neutrally okay. They have nice ideas, they don't have great delivery, they're not so terrible that I can absolutely rave about it. There is practically nothing outstanding to say in either direction, and in my mind, that's kind of worse. I'm not going to remember these 2 episodes, even though they were specifically a double bill of siblings. I just don't think they do very much to bring up either the messages they're trying to showcase, or in delivering the best version of the story they end up running with. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe if you haven't already to keep up with new animated movie news. We'll cover anything new from Pixar as we go. But for now, time for the second half of Pixar Win or Lose, Part 3. A little brother trying to fit in and see friends. Cool. Gets mixed up with the villain characters. Nice, it's the chicken from before. Whoa, I'm wearing a chicken. What are the odds? And then though he does somewhat turn around of, oh, I'm going to do the right thing, it then also ends on a cliffhanger of him being given an offer to be friends again and cuts off early. And then I'm assuming that moment's not going to be seen for another 3 episodes. It's not paid off in the part 2 of this segment with the bigger sister. No, it's just, who knows what he did. British ending, technically bad. He falls through the cycle again for all we know. And the ending for the second episode is the boy being left alone in the baseball match after the girl runs off. I do at least like what I think I'm meant to be passing, that is, the endings of each 2 episodes show us slightly more progress on the final day, I think. With 1 and 2 being the kid getting hit in the face, 3 and 4 being characters off to the side having their own issues. And now we see the aftermath of that, at least, and then now an argument on the middle of the field. But hey, for all I know, it could very well be that the kid that gets hit in the face at the end of 1 and 2 hasn't happened yet in this timeline. I don't know. I just think these 2 episodes are a little bit flat. With the series trying to showcase, oh, all sorts of people have all sorts of problems, I guess it only makes sense that you were going to have a relationship episode crop up. But also, you kind of already had a relationship episode. Episode 2 was the video gamey teacher dealing with relationships online, and at least online dating is refreshing. I don't know how I feel about that. But now it's another one with 2 kids in a relationship, trying to be insecure. I kind of would have preferred if it was all the comedian aspect of trying to fit in, relying on humor to hide your insecurities. That seems like a bigger, better, more unique story to go with than, relationship. And then kid trying to fit in, going with the bad guys. Again, they're not that big. And I think it just makes it just part of the noise that is either this series or just general kids content like this. Now that being said, of course, some of the highlights of this series is the small details, and there are all sorts of little bits. Of course, we see several scenes from several other episodes. The little brother has a perspective of the mother with the baby from the last episode. The whole group talk after the first baseball match that we only really see more in episode 1 now has an extended scene of other halves of conversations. And even going to the movie theater between these 2 episodes, you see more of certain scenes depending on who's watching, because they're more invested in the actual relationship side of what's being shown on the movie, which is a parody of the Fast and Furious family meme, because, again, I think this is more representative of the show being so slow to produce as the industry works like that. There are a lot of memes and references. They're all old. Fast and Furious, family thing. Saying the word lit as if that's new. Doing that one TikTok dance. It's notably, a few years held back. It's not as far as I was saying it's millennial humor and writing from the first couple episodes, but there is a semblance of, this isn't that down with the kids, Especially with the rate kids are moving on and thinking these days. This is 2018 kids. This is a pre-COVID story, you know what I mean? Oh man, we have gone back to this, really. Another couple of details you can find is the janitor character, one of my personal favorites, is like lurking around in the background, keeping an eye on pivotal moments, which is, nice. There is lots to enjoy in this show. As I say, the animators and the creators and the directors are clearly talented in making a nice story, but these 2 episodes are very much just classic, basic, and simplistic in a way that you can kind of skip over these two, unless the finale is going to reveal something big about how it's all actually going to tie together nicely. These are just kind of your more generic stories. And while they have faintly nice ideas with the actual visual effects they add on top, I kind of wish they could have done more with it. It's mostly just, look, if I look through the tube, it looks different. Wowee, and now I'm flying and I land in a pirate ship. Or it's, hey, I'm a papercraft guy in this little scene that I'll cut back and forth to, and I have one moment on a hand, which is nice. I think there's potential for these visual effects to have gone further. I feel like the cardboardy element could have extended further, or like if the guy's naturally coming more out of his shell as he gets more comfortable, that could have manifested externally, which would be... It's just kind of the same as the first episode's sweaty guy, I guess, so maybe not. 6 episodes in, we're already running out of steam on the concepting? Really, this is the classic just before the finale lull, where the real hot topic is next week, where we get to talk about Kai, the actual controversial character of the series, as well as the finale that'll hopefully wrap everything together as a nice, here's how the final day goes. We're past the directorial highlights of anti-gravity and the influencer representation that I really quite enjoyed of the last couple episodes, being better than the first 2 episodes, which themselves were terrible, generic, and rehashing Pixar stories. I've only now recently seen some good rage-baity articles saying, Pixar's Win or Lose got rid of the trans character, but hey, they've added an openly Christian one. Daring today, aren't we, Disney? What an interesting choice of words for that journalist. That was the first episode's character, just because they briefly say, oh, Heavenly Father, and they pray before a match. But also, the mother of that character is like a crystal-wearing tarot card reader, so it doesn't quite fit in the narrative. Just a good rage bait, I guess. But yeah, I honestly, I don't have much to even vent or say about these stories. These are your classic standards. Young kid trying to look up to the others and fit in with friends. Relationship. The best parts of this story are imagining the parts that they could have done instead. But hey, there's only one more Wednesday left to go, and next week will be the real corker to see if this series sticks the landing or not. So far, I like less of this series than I like, but there's always a chance it could all wrap round together. As the core idea, it is nice in a lot of ways. Oh great, I just found out my best Shrek 5 short's just been added as made for kids. I guess I better work on that on the side. But otherwise, I guess we'll just have to see what the final verdict is next Wednesday for the finale of Pixar's Win or Lose. This is classically just the part 3 of 4 of a TV series. So we're finally here. It's time to make the final verdict on Pixar's Win or Lose. And I'll be honest, when going into this series in the first place, I very much saw it a little bit on the back foot. Being an original sports TV series made by Pixar, I was a little bit like, seems pretty neutral, I'm not that fussed. And then as we saw a little bit more how it's going to be a deep character exploration with an anthology series of everyone's different perspectives, that's a really nice format that I think is really well done and perfectly fitting for a series format, since long form means you can give more times to the characters, which is exactly what Pixar excels at. It just sounds like good storytelling. And then after that, there was the real big red flag that really put it on the back foot for me personally going into this, and that is with the executive decision to make some harsh last-minute political turns by removing one of the characters' and making them no longer directly trans. And I'll be honest, that does put a dampener on the experience. It clearly shows a disparaging between what the creators intended and the final product we got, and wherever your opinions are on that exact decision, it does affect the final outcome of intention and reality for this series. Another recurrent issue I've had with the series is the fact that it's 2 hours long. It's 2 hours and 25 minutes, I believe, which is nice. But when you're releasing it 2 episodes at a time, it becomes less impactful and memorable because all of the episodes are interlinked. The fact of the matter is, it's been a month since the beginning of the first episode review. But either way, before getting proper ahead of ourselves, let's dig into specifically episode 7 and episode 8 here, as to be honest, these are the 2 episodes I've most been looking forward to, for better and for worse. As episode 7 is the one focused on Kai, who is the very character who's had a semblance of their character removed. So, did I like this episode? Yeah, I think it was a marked upgrade from the prior episodes we'd been seeing, and definitely one of the bigger highlights of the series. While it's not so directly about Kai's identity, it's all about being a new kid that's only recently joined the school, and then feeling the pressures of the sport by having a father being so expectant on them, whilst at the same time sacrificing a little bit of themselves in order to make ends meet. Now visually, this episode is just as stunning as pretty much most of this series has been, and since each character comes with their own perspective vision that affects something in the visual effects department, Kai's example is floating up into the air when they're feeling elated and praised, and sinking into the ground when they're feeling terrible about themselves, and I really like this. I think this is one of the better examples out of all 8 versions of animation flourish that we see. I really enjoy this, but I also can't help but think when looking at this narrative, it is a lot again the first episode. It is, again, another character focused entirely on the softball game. It's not baseball, I don't know, oops. Trying to make up for the expectations of their father. One is a coach and one is a literal wannabe coach. And they're anxious because they don't feel like they're doing enough. Even though in this case, they are at least notably functional and they have some high praises to boost them up along the way. And I guess in this scenario, their parent is more pressuring directly with their intention. But it's weird because I don't think that story was that well done, but I did enjoy this episode more than the usual ones. Maybe it just comes to the actual presentation and the directorial choices in the animation, or maybe it's because I was looking for something to bash on with this episode because I thought there would be a glaring hole in this episode from the parts that got taken out. What we know directly was removed is specific lines referring to gender identity in this character episode, so it doesn't necessarily mean that this episode was entirely about their identity, as much as that is very much a thing that a kid could be dealing with that no one else knows about, and could be a very poignant and integral point of the mythos of what this episode is trying to display. And maybe the fact that this episode is a loop of the first episode is an indication that it's just been rehashed and recycled, or maybe it's a nice thematic thing that the beginning reflects towards the end again, and it's like, these characters are kind of similar, and they're more like each other than they think. But I think the thing that cooled me off on going to that direct approach is the fact that there is still a reference to that identity question, because it seems like there is a semblance of a scene that I assume got deleted, and they kept the end of it, for which you can dig into more if you want to. It sounds like the creators managed to work a way around still making that probably canon to the character without directly addressing it to upset the parents in the room. Because there is a scene of Kai sitting down with their father at the end of some conversation where they clearly say, "This is a lot, but I love you regardless." And then they feel elated on that.
This is a lot. Nothing can change the fact that I love you.
And it feels a little bit out of place, because we have a high of succeeding at softball, and then it cuts to a high of, I am affirming that I love you, back to back, and then we move on. But I'm glad it's there, because it's not active fully as deletionist as it could be. And though we don't directly see exactly what it's about, it's nice to see that there is still some semblance in there in some form for the character. Maybe that's what softened me on it, maybe it's still a problem in its own right, but I'm glad there is at least something than absolutely nothing at all. And everything else I really enjoyed about the episode. After the series finished, I also watched the making of Win or Lose, and it definitely made me actually appreciate a lot more of the animation. I think I've said pretty consistently that the visuals and the directorial choices are pretty brilliant in a lot of places, but it really goes to show with some of the technological choices and challenges they had to face. Seeing those sort of hurdles they had along the way really helps me to appreciate the artistry that's going on throughout this whole series. Even if I'm a little bit more focused on the narrative than maybe I should be, it's a character anthology, you know? It doesn't matter where the softball game really goes. And so I think maybe with those combined as well, I was able to loosen a little bit more. It, of course, was never going to reach my fullest expectations, episode 7. It wasn't going to be the best one, but it's certainly not the worst. It's not boring, like I would still argue some of the older ones are, but it's also not actively bad. Maybe it's just the visuals picking it up, but I don't mind it. Although there is also a notable gap about talking about Kai as a character from the behind the scenes, which you can probably read into those conversations were cut as well from the executives up top, but But what we get as a final end result is clearly a little bit stinted, but I think is still functional and visually pleasing, and though I wish there could be more to see, I still enjoyed the episode nonetheless by the end, but I'll still always be on the side that tries to push Disney forwards, you know? The other real reason I was looking forward to this final week is of course the final episode, the one that loops it all together, brings every character into that final day at the championship, and of course, it does that in droves as well. The final episode is all about Coach Dan, of all people, the father of the girl at the very start, Laurie, and his perspective through the week that then ties everything together. And it certainly does. 1/3 of the episode is the week before, 2/3 is the final day that we've seen several times over at this point. And I'll be honest, I really liked it. It was a surprising action sequence. There's all the great classic things of they enter into the day and you see everyone's scenes, but as the camera swipes through them all. And of course, it's always interesting to see everyone's different perspectives on the same events or characters you've seen multiple times at this point, but not knowing their perspectives. Coach Dan in this scenario inflates like a blimp, apparently. I don't quite know. Well, I'd say there's an odd choice, but fair enough. And yeah, I think it was a more than palatable finale. And I think it is a massive step up in comparison to the other adult-centric episode with Frankie, simply because it felt just a lot more poignant. He has his own growing concerns that he sort of bottles up over certain circumstances. He is a man of divorce. He's got a lot of parental expectations on him, weighing him down. These parents have been a wonderful antagonist throughout the whole series. You've got